Yo, what is up, y'all? My name is Robert Donaldson, and welcome back to another edition of Rob's Best Bets. And in this episode, baby, we are talking once again about college football here in week one. No more entrees, no more precursors. We've got a full college football slate starting on Thursday, working through Friday, going into Saturday, going into Sunday, and then even a standalone game on Monday. And we're going to be talking about the entirety of week one in this video. Obviously, looking at what we did in week 0, we came out in the green. We essentially bet on 3 games. We had 2 bets in that Fresno game with their full game spread and then the first half money line, which contributed to that 2-2 record. But more often than not, we've actually been pretty on the ball with all of our picks so far that we've had. We had a really good sweat with Iowa State and Kansas State in that Dublin, Ireland game with the under. But hey, we'll take a kneel down at the 1 any day, especially when, it makes sense from a clock standpoint as well. But with all that being said, y'all, I am so jacked up to talk about these week 1 bets. But first, we do need to take a second to shout out today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. And if you haven't already signed up using my promo code ROBDFB, I highly recommend you do so, especially because over on Twitter/X at RobDFB, we're actually going to be rolling out a few Underdog play-em entries for this upcoming week as well here. So make sure you guys are taking a look over there. But with all that being said, y'all, let's go ahead and jump into our bets here in week 1 of the college football season. All right, first up, we're starting off with a game here between Boise State and South Florida here on Thursday night. And this is one of my favorite bets of the week when you're talking about just the opportunity to sort of sell high and buy low on 2 teams that I think are on both sides of those spectrums. And when you are looking at South Florida, Alex Golesh is a coach that I do think kind of lost some of that steam near the back end of the season, and in large part it was because of a lot of injuries to the offensive side of the ball. And being an offensive head coach, he was kind of almost neutered to an extent when you're talking about how much they could actually put out on the field near the back half of the season. But now Byron Brown is back in the fold here, and Boise State on the other side with Danielson and company, they are still a good team. I think they're going to be competitive in that G5 slot, but I don't necessarily think that they're a guarantee to kind of wrap up that G5 slot right out from the outset here. And from that side of things, let's go ahead and take South Florida, getting the 6.5 points here for 4 units for our first bet here in week 1. For pick number 2, we are taking a look at a really fun rivalry matchup here between ECU and NC State. And ECU is one of those teams that, when you go back through their history, actually do have a pretty rich history when it does come to the sport of football. And NC State is one of those teams that, for the longest time, would schedule them year after year after year until it almost wasn't paying dividends because of kind of ECU slotting within college football, and also the fact that ECU was getting NC State in a lot of those matchups. Now, when you are looking at these 2 teams, I do feel like NC State has the upside this season to really have a fun year, and I do want to find a way to back ECU, but at the same time, I just don't think that this is the matchup to do it in. So let's go ahead and lay the 14 points here with the Wolfpack for 1 unit for our second bet here in week 1. For pick number 3, we have got a very interesting game here between Wyoming and Akron. And when you are looking at the G5, I don't think either of these teams are going to be overly relevant when you're talking about potentially competing for a playoff or, even potentially reaching bowl eligibility, to be completely honest with you. But at the same time, what we do know about Wyoming, even without Craig Bowl, is that they are definitely a lower scoring team that tries to kind of emphasize the physical style of defense and field position. And Akron on the other side is just one of those teams that, honestly, is just rather inept. And the fact that Akron is also experiencing a number of suspensions as well heading into this new season is definitely a really good opportunity, in my opinion, to take a shot on an under that's sitting at 50.5. And I get it. Akron is one of those teams that got bludgeoned by teams last season on the defensive side of things. But man, if Wyoming can come out there and just do their thing, they might only score 28 points in total, and that would put us way under the total, just because I do think that edge kind of lies with Wyoming here. So let's go ahead and take the under of 50.5 points for 2 units for our third bet here in week 1. For pick number 4, we have another game here on Thursday night between Miami of Ohio and Wisconsin. And Wisconsin's a team that's kind of going through an identity crisis right now because, honestly, Luke Fickell has been a disaster so far. And now, when you're kind of looking at the style that they're trying to move to, kind of away from that dairy raid offense, more to that ground and tack that's worked for Wisconsin over the past, 3 decades plus, well, now we're going to kind of see how that translates. And Miami of Ohio on the other side is not a pushover G5. They have been a very competent team under Chuck Martin, especially over the last few years here, and 17.5 points, that's a boatload when you're talking about a team that we don't really know what to expect from offensively, and a team that has honestly kind of been a program on the rise over recent years. So let's go ahead and take the Red Hawks here, getting the 17.5 points for 2 units for our fourth bet here in week 1. For pick number 5, we are taking a look at a really fun game yet again here on Thursday. Thursday's slate is absolutely fantastic. We're talking about the quality of games and also just the number of bets that we have right out the gate. But we're going to be taking a look at a matchup here between Nebraska and Cincinnati. And this is a very interesting game for a number of reasons, because when you do look at Nebraska, this is a team with a lot of expectations this year. 6-6, 7-5, 5-7, which is what we've kind of seen from Nebraska pretty much over the past decade now at this point. It's not going to come to pass. There's too many expectations here. Dylan Raiola is going into year 2. There's a lot of hype around the Cornhuskers, but Scott Satterfield and Cincinnati are kind of one of those more scrappy teams in the Big 12 and just within this sort of kind of medium range of the power conferences in general. And I get it. The nice part about this game is that it's on a neutral site. It's not actually at Cincinnati, but at the same time, I do feel like when you do have that neutralizing factor of it not being in Lincoln, there's a good opportunity here for Cincinnati to keep this game tight for a long enough stretch that 7 points as being kind of the buffer in this game feels like a little bit too many. So let's go ahead and take the Bearcats here, catching the 7 points for 3 units for our fifth bet here on Thursday. All right, next up, we are heading out to a really fun G5 game here between AppState and Charlotte. And AppState is the big brand, obviously. They've had a lot of success over the past 2 decades with guys like Eli Drinkowitz, Scott Satterfield, and now they're kind of in this purgatory state where they have had some issues over the past couple seasons. And introducing, another team to that mix now is Charlotte under Tim Albin, who obviously coached a long time at Ohio. And I get it, Charlotte's not had a lot of success in years past, but this is a team that I kind of want to jump on the bandwagon early because we know what Tim Albin can do. He produces a lot of winners. And in this matchup here against a bigger brand App State team, which is one of those kind of bigger brands right now that I'm kind of willing to sell on, I'm really willing to buy on the other side of this coin. So let's go ahead and take the 7 points here with Charlotte for our 6th bet here in week 1. All right, next up, we are staying with that Friday slate where we have a game between Georgia Tech and Colorado. And I really do like the Georgia Tech angle here in terms of, one, them winning this game, but also the just kind of the upside that they have with this game and all the games moving forward. Now, that 4 number is very interesting, and I've kind of found myself struggling with the idea of actually laying that number. Now, when you are looking at the total in this game of 52.5, that's where my eyes go, because Caden Salter, let me tell you, I know a lot of people feel some way about Shedeur Sanders. I'm not here to kind of look for that beef, but I will say, in terms of the college game, Caden Salter is a dynamic player, and he definitely has the stronger arm in terms of velo. Maybe doesn't have kind of that pocket movement or that touch passing ability that Shedeur Sanders brought to this offense last year, but he can move it with his legs. He is a far better athlete, and he's also a guy that if everything clicks for him, just as a passer as well, we could see similar strides to that of, say, like Lamar Jackson going from a sophomore in college to a junior in college when he kind of took the world by storm there. So let's actually take a look at the over of 52.5 points here. I do think that both offenses are going to come to play, and it wouldn't even surprise me if this number is pretty much already there at halftime as well. So let's go ahead and take that over for 3 units for another bet here on this Friday slate. All right, next up, we have got a very interesting matchup here between UNLV and Sam Houston State. And Sam Houston State started off their season in a little bit of a heartbreaking note because they had Western Kentucky on the ropes early in that third quarter, but then it just kind of fell off where the passing game wasn't working, the rushing attack wasn't working as well as it was in the first half. And on the other side, UNLV had almost the opposite thing happen where they started off very, very slow against Idaho State. FCS Idaho State, might I add, where they were actually trailing at halftime and throughout most of the game as well. Now, UNLV is kind of under a new head coaching regime where we'll kind of see how Dan Mullen does in his sort of, get back into college football. But Sam Houston State is also in that kind of boat where they are introducing a new head coach and a new coaching regime post Casey Keeler. And I do think, though, when you are looking at both those dynamics at play and a 10.5 point spread, I actually do really like the Bearcats in this spot, especially with a veteran quarterback at the helm and Hunter Watson as well. So give me the 10.5 points with Sam Houston State for 3 units. And I almost wanted to pull the trigger on the money line, but I think the odds makers kind of caught onto this one pretty fast because the odds on the money line are actually pretty darn smashed for the first half and the full game. But let's go ahead and take those 10.5 points, and let's feel pretty confident in doing so as well. All right, next up, we are going to take a look at our final Friday game here in week 1 between Central Michigan and San Jose State. And when you're looking at San Jose State and Ken Niumatalolo, this is a program that I think is truly on the rise, and this is one of the G5 teams that I really do think could supplant Boise State when you look at the grand scheme of things because, man, their schedule is wide open, and they have a really talented team. They have one of the best head coaches in all of college football, and last season, I thought their program took some massive strides. And in this game against Central Michigan, they're only laying 11.5 points, and this truly feels like one of those kind of buy low opportunities on a team that we probably won't be able to get this price on moving forward. So let's go ahead and lay the 11.5 points here with San Jose State for 3 units for our final bet here on Friday. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and move on to the Saturday card, and we're going to start off with this noon Eastern slate with a really fun bet here, and we're going to be taking a look at an in-state rivalry matchup here between Mississippi State and Southern Miss, and Southern Miss is actually one of those programs that I also think is in a really good buy low opportunity zone because their new head coach, Charles Huff, is one of those guys that we saw at Marshall kind of elevate the program the second he stepped in. And now Southern Miss is a team this year where when you look at their makeup, my goodness, y'all, they are overturning everybody, which can sometimes be good, can sometimes be bad. But when you are looking at a really good head coach, bringing in guys who I think really fit his system, I'm looking at that as like a net positive here. And Mississippi State is one of those teams that if you're going to be betting against an SEC school, they're one of the teams that I want to be betting against. And in this game, Southern Miss is catching 13.5 points. I say we take them for 3 units, and for an additional full unit, let's go ahead and bet on them through the first half on the money line here as well. All right, next up, we are staying in that noon Eastern time window, and we are looking at a game here between Syracuse and Tennessee. And in this matchup, Fran Brown is kind of up against it, and this has kind of been the whole MO of the offseason is, can Syracuse sort of repeat the success that they found last year? But what's not being talked about is, can Tennessee do the same thing? They made the college football playoff on the backs of a really good defense, a really good ground game, and Nico Iamaleava, and now they have a lot of pieces that were there last year that aren't there this year, and we are still kind of seeing a price for Tennessee in this matchup that's kind of signifying that they can just repeat everything that they did last season. And from that side of things, yeah, do I think that Syracuse is going to be a little bit more down this season comparatively to last year when they had a lot of good offensive pieces in place? Sure, but 2 touchdowns is a crazy buffer to pay for a quarterback in Joey Aguilar that I'm not really bought in on just in general, and just a Tennessee team that I don't think we truly have a good handle on. So let's go ahead and take the 14 points with Syracuse for 2 units for our second bet here on Saturday. All right, next up, we are going to a G5 game that I'm sure is not on a lot of radars, and that's kind of my sweet spot, honestly, especially early in the season. And the game we're going to be taking a look at here is between Temple and UMass. It's a battle of 2 teams that have been at the basement for quite some time now, but when you are looking at Temple and Casey Keeler, I really do believe that Casey Keeler is going to have this program turned around, and whether that's, this year or 2 years or 3 years, we have seen it at Delaware, we have seen it at Sam Houston State, and I really do think that Temple is a great landing spot for a guy to accumulate talent and build a program, because this doesn't feel maybe like a sleeping giant, but it does feel like one of those G5 teams that should be a lot better than what they've been over past seasons. And in this matchup here, Temple is laying 2.5 points, and I do feel like that's a reasonable price to buy in on early in the season with this Temple squad. So let's go ahead and lay the 2.5 points here for 2 units for our third bet here on Saturday. All right, next up, we are taking a look at another P4 versus G5 matchup here, and this is a doozy because we have Marshall taking on Georgia, and Georgia is an interesting team because obviously Carson Beck just decided, you know what, I'm bailing. I'm going to Miami. That's where my girlfriend is, and Gunnar Stockton, who we kind of got a taste of in the SEC championship game, in the college football playoff, he's now kind of the incumbent starter, but I'm not really bought in on him being the long-term fixture this year at the position. And in week 1 here, we're paying a Georgia price that kind of includes Carson Beck, includes that great defense that they've always had, and just a lot of elite talent. And sure, they might have that elite talent, but I'm not bought in on Georgia just being this dominant force that has reigned over the SEC over the past, 5-6 years now. And from that side of things, I get it. Marshall is kind of a program that's in flux, especially with Charles Huff bouncing all the way to Southern Miss. But at 39.5, just kind of getting that buffer, I really do want to take a shot here with Marshall for 2 units for our fourth bet here on Saturday. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a more high-profile game here between Alabama and Florida State. And Alabama under Kalen DeBoer had a very bad season, honestly, last year that fell short of expectations to a high degree. They had a chance to make the college football playoff, and then they just kind of shit down their leg against Oklahoma. There's no other way around it, and obviously they lost to Vanderbilt. They lost in their bowl game to Michigan, and they were all kind of low-scoring, non-Alabama-like games. But now we're back to just paying Alabama-like prices. This has kind of been the theme of the episode, where I think a lot of teams are getting billed based on their reputation as a program over the past 5 years. But is Alabama the same as when they had Nick Saban? I don't necessarily buy into that whatsoever. And Florida State, they've been an up and down roller coaster over recent seasons. But when you're at home, kind of in this redemption zone, and you're getting this 13.5-point buffer, man, that is so enticing. And I get it. This could make me look like a flat-out idiot if Florida State can't revitalize some of those issues that like really plagued them last year. But Castellanos is a quarterback that can move around. This team just kind of feels like it's in a better spot than it was last season. And from those side of things, I say we go ahead and take the Seminoles here, getting the 13.5 points for 3 units. And I say we go ahead and bet them on the full game money line here as well. All right, next up, we have a matchup here between Nicholls and Troy. And when you're looking at this matchup, yes, it's an FCS versus FBS matchup, but man, I feel like the talent level, when you kind of look at the rosters, look at the down transfers that Nicholls has, look at the spot that Troy's in just in general right now, it doesn't feel like these two schools are very far off from one another. And in week 1 at the FCS level, Nicholls pulled off a massive upset over number 4 Incarnate Word, which, maybe doesn't fit onto a lot of different radars, but it's definitely a massive upset when you're talking about the scope of college football. And right in this matchup here, Troy's getting the benefit of the doubt, being an FCS school, or FBS school rather, and laying a 20.5 point number. And this is where we're going to place our first speculative bet of the college football season. And we're going to take Nicholls getting the 20.5 points for 1 unit. And for an additional unit, we're going to place a full game money line here as well. 11-1 on that full game money line. And that's essentially why we're betting the spread, is just to take a shot at that 11-1 pair, because hey, if they cover, then fine. We kind of fit into that break-even zone, but I really do think we have a chance here at a long shot stab with Nicholls. I just don't want to be overly invested when it comes out in the grand scheme of things. But let's go ahead, place 2 full units here on Nicholls, and hey, we might have ourselves a really fun Saturday if this one comes to fruition. All right, next up, we are taking a look at a matchup here between Missouri State and USC. And no, this is not an FCS versus FBS matchup, as Missouri State is now an FBS team. But my goodness, the skill gap here is going to be wide, because USC's got a ton of talent. And Missouri State is probably going to be in that kind of rebuilding flux. I don't think that they're one of the better teams to kind of come up from the FCS level in past years, when you just kind of look at the accumulation of talent that they have on their roster. And Lincoln Riley, man, this seat is definitely hot. I don't know how you can kind of say it's not when you have to factor in, I guess, the expectations that come with being USC's head coach. But 35 points here, I get it. That is a boatload. That is 5 touchdowns, and that's a hefty amount. But at the same time, I know that USC is going to put up points in this game. That's what they do against these kinds of teams. And for that reason, I say we go ahead and lay the 35 points here for 2 units. And I really do think that we're going to see an offensive explosion out of the Trojans in this game. All right, next up, we are taking a look at one of the biggest games of the weekend between LSU and Clemson. It's a battle of the Death Valleys. And when you're looking at this matchup here, my goodness, the seat is also very, very hot for one Brian Kelly. And if it wasn't any kind of, issue last season in terms of, Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame going to the national championship game in lieu of, Brian Kelly talking about how he needed to come to LSU in the first place to build a championship roster. Well, hey, this is your moment in the sun, Brian Kelly, because you've got a team. Let's see how good it actually is. And Clemson is one of those teams, too, that everybody is kind of anointing or pre-anointing as, one, the ACC champion, but also a potential national champion as well. And 4.5 points kind of feels like almost a bait line to take LSU here, but at the same time, I kind of feel like LSU is going to be game, especially with all these narratives going against Brian Kelly. And although I may not love LSU long-term this season, I do think they're going to keep it within that 4.5 point margin. So let's go ahead and take the 4.5 points here for 2 units for our third to last bet here on the Saturday card. All right, next up, we are going back off the radar here where we have a G5 matchup between Georgia Southern and Fresno State. And Fresno State came out flat against Kansas. And I shouldn't say came out flat because they actually looked really impressive on their opening touchdown drive. But from that point on, they were flat, they were dead, and it never kind of felt like they were back in that ball game after Jalen Daniels was kind of rolling around doing his thing. Now, because of that impression in week 0, sometimes we can catch a really good value bet on those types of teams that do lose in that kind of fashion. And I do think that Fresno State and Matt Entz have a really good chance to get back in the win column against a team that's coming from all the way on the other side of the country to Fresno. And from that side of things, we are getting plus money with what I think could be a good Fresno State team here at home. So let's go ahead and take the Bulldogs here on the money line for 3 units for our third to last bet here in week 1. All right, for our second to last bet here in week 1, we're heading back out to LA where we have Utah taking on UCLA, and UCLA is technically the home team in this matchup, but are they really the home team? Not really. I mean, there's no home environment here. Now, at the same time, they are neutralizing that Salt Lake City environment that Utah potentially could have at their backs. And I do feel like right now, there's a couple things happening with this matchup. One, everybody's expecting Kyle Whittingham to just kind of get back in the groove of things after dealing with some injuries at quarterback last season. And totally fair. He's one of my favorite coaches in college football. I understand the appeal in wanting to back Utah to kind of have a bounce back season. But on the other side of things, I also feel like people are underrating how good UCLA might actually be, because I do feel like for the first time in some time, UCLA does have a little bit of upside here. And although they aren't really carrying a really strong home field environment, I do feel like the fact that this is almost going to play like a neutral field is pretty big for this game. And 6.5 points is a massive buffer here to pay on a Utah team that we still kind of need to see prove it, and a UCLA team that I think actually overachieved expectations in year 1 of Deshaun Foster. So let's go ahead and take the 6.5 points here for 3 units for our second to last bet here in week 1. All right, for our final bet here in week 1, we are actually headed over to Sunday where we have Notre Dame taking on Miami. And when you're looking at this Miami team under Mario Cristobal, one of the things that really pops is obviously the absence of Cam Ward. And when you look at how their season played out last year, they dodged a lot of bullets. They were struggling against Duke. They nearly lost at Cal. They obviously lost to Syracuse. And there were a number of other games in there as well that I feel like they underperformed or kind of almost dropped the ball completely on their season. And when you're looking at the Carson Beck replacement of Cam Ward in this spot at quarterback, my goodness, I'm not a big Carson Beck guy. I kind of feel like that's a massive downgrade. And from that side of things, I don't see how Miami should be priced like they're being priced in this matchup. And I get it. Notre Dame is overseeing a quarterback change as well. They had a lot of hype, obviously coming off of a national championship run there too, and that's certainly factoring into this line. But I really do think this is a perfect sell high on Miami and just kind of buying Notre Dame at a price that I think is somewhat reasonable as well. So let's go ahead and take Notre Dame on the full game money line for 4 units for our final bet here in week 1 of the college football season. All that being said, I really want to thank you guys for sitting through this 30+ minute long video. And obviously, you know, a lot of bets, but we're covering Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and even Sunday in this video. And that's why it's kind of a longer range video. If you do like this style of long kind of form video, make sure you drop a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, share it on social media. All of that stuff helps me a ton. But with all that being said, y'all, I am so jacked to get the college football season underway. And we have a lot of really great plays that I'm really excited to kind of see how they turn out for us as well. But with all that being said, I will see you in a future video. Take it easy.